So we've got an approach to the type. I had two options for text blocking. The class voted on not this one, which was more kind of punk rock poster, and more this one, which is more kind of standard movie poster, right? You can also find influences. So for me, on assignment 6, I found these influences. There's a band called Public Menace, and they have a pretty standard t-shirt kind of like that. And then their album cover is like this. This is what's called a letterpress type, where the type is set into a block, right, and then cut out of it. And that's kind of interesting. It's used for stenciling and stamping a lot. So there are lots of approaches, but I think this has its own personality and works. So this is the one that was voted on. So now what I'm going to do is save this as the PSD. This will be my finished poster eventually. Just save it to the desktop, Karl Assignment 6 poster. And then I'm going to save it as a JPEG so I can bring it into Illustrator. And I call these test files. And I'm going to call it test blocking to the desktop as a JPEG. Or it could be a PNG, but a JPEG takes up a little less space. Now I can close Photoshop. Don't need it. And what I want to do is, like these t-shirts and album covers, I want to turn those letter forms that I sketched into solid black vectors. Just like we did for our vector graphics project. So with that test JPEG, which I usually mark as gray, and I mark my PSD for the poster as green, right? Still a long way to go, but I can go ahead and put that into assignment 6, both of those from the desktop. Remember, it's up to you to keep your work organized. Whoops, wrong folder. There we go. I am going to open up the text blocking sketch with Adobe Illustrator. And my computer just updated, so now we're using Illustrator 2026. But it's got all the same features. So this is an image. You remember this from when we've worked in Illustrator before. I'm not going to image trace this. That would not yield great results, right? But what I'll use this is as a template for designing the vector type. So what do? I double click it and I onion skin it on the layer itself. Dim the images about 50% and then lock it. And then make a new vector layer, which will have red as the anchor points, really easy to see. And now I'm going to make type. So the easiest way to just make your own typeface after you've done a text blocking sketch is to use the pen tool. That makes the most direct vector two-dimensional shapes with the fewest anchor points. And you want to do them as a black fill with no stroke. So how do I do it? I just point and click. I'm not dragging at all, but I'm always finishing at the end. And I can use as many anchors as I think I need, and then I can always round them out later. Or I can show you how I can round them out as I go. So if I click on this point now and then drag, I get a curve, right? And then it will come out as a curve, and then I can finish it. But where we get into trouble is when we do a curve. I'll show you with the B. So I click over here and click and drag and curve it, and then it will come out as a curve, and I like that. But now it's a straight again. So I curve it, and then it's a curve again, but not the curve I want. I can click back where I started, and it will be a straight again. And then I finish it off like that. I'm not going to worry about the insides yet, right? Because I have to use Pathfinder for those. But first, let me just get these forms down and make sure that they're not touching each other so I can adjust their spacing later. I'm going to make the L really simple. And then the I. Nothing simpler than a capital I with no serifs in a standard font. And then the C. Now, like I did with the U and the B, I'm going to have some straight edges and then some curved edges. All right, now how do I do the insides? Well, before I worry about that, because it's very readable before I cut out the P, I'm going to use my small selection tool to select individual letters. And then once I've selected them, I'm going to use the large selection tool to transform them. To kind of rotate them, stretch them, place them individually. You never have to hit return like you do with transform in Photoshop. So for instance, I can tilt the U a little bit, drag it down a little bit. Then go to the small selection tool, go to the B, go to the large selection tool. I don't like how vertical it is. Just going to tilt it a tiny bit. And this is typesetting. This is playing with the space between the letters, giving them each their own space. You see how the P is really strong, but this side doesn't seem as strong? So this is how I can fix that. I can make these bigger, more powerful. Fill up the blocking a little bit better. And this is just all hand-done vector type. And I don't like the point on that C, right? I'm going to take a trick from, now it's a K. Ooh. I'm going to take a trick from Stranger Things, and I'm going to decrease the kerning and make that look a little more uncomfortable. So, how do I do that? I've now placed everything, but now I can use the small selection tool. And remember your vector training, right? I can add anchor points onto the path with the pen tool, and I can delete anchor points onto the path with the pen tool. And I can change anchor points from being straights to being curves if I want, right? Just to soften them a little bit. By clicking and dragging them. And then little things like this sometimes happen when you're using the pen tool. This little twist. It's definitely not what I want. So I go to the small selection tool and I convert this into a straight. It should have worked. Oh, because it's this one. It's this big curve. Yeah, okay, so let's figure that out. There it is. So I got to take that and change it. There we go. Almost there. Okay, now just round out parts of the B a little bit. I'll just use the rounding, the cornering tool to do that. But I don't need to do it everywhere, just on the ones I want to soften. And I want to move up the belly of the B. So I select them all, and then I select just on this anchor point, and then I bring it up. And then I can adjust the curve on this one and the placement of it and use that cornering tool, right? So you have a ton of control once it's a vector. And this is easiest to mess with as a vector because everything will be perfectly clean. But it can be a little tricky with curves, so I like to limit the number of vectors or the number of anchor points there are to play with. Now that's all just with the pen tool. Once you see the anchors, you can also, of course, use my favorite tool, the pencil tool, just to even it out. As long as you start on the path and end on the path, there you go. And you can use the smooth tool to average it. So this is how you do kind of hand-done type. Same thing with the bottom of the U. Small selection tool. And then I'm just going to round those out, but I don't want the top rounded. So I have to select them individually and then round them. But it's not that bad. Okay. And then what about the P? Same thing. I'm just going to use the rounding tool to soften a little bit these edges. First you have to click off, then you click back on. And then I don't love that top arc of the P, so I'm just going to select it. Then I'm going to use the pencil tool to redraw it. Now I'm going to do menace in a different way, because we also have typefaces to play with, which are themselves all vectors. So you can create it yourself, like I've done here, or you can modify from existing typefaces. Or you can do a little mix of both. But it's actually not all that scary to do your own type. Especially if you like that kind of thing, which I've never been a doodler that does a lot of type. But Illustrator makes it kind of appealing. Okay, now, just to remind you, how do I do the cutouts, right? So I'm going to go to Transparency, which you can find under Window. And I'm going to just take the letters like the B and then just take their transparency down temporarily so that on a new layer, lock this layer, make a new layer just so it's easy to find. And I'm just going to use the pencil tool. I'm going to draw the insides. Make sure they connect. So there's one. Let me draw that with a little bit more strength at the top. Whoops. Why is that not connecting? There we go. Okay, now I'm going to fill that with white. Bless you. And then I'm going to subtract that from the B behind it. Okay. So I have to find it. There it is. And then select both of them. And then I hit Pathfinder minus. Right? And then I get it cut out. Now the problem with that is then when I go to opacity, it thinks it's 100%. So how do I get it back to actually 100%? I have to click on this, but I'll do that at the end.